Rain hammered the ancient stones of Riverrun as if the river itself had risen to beat upon the walls. Inside the great hall, the air was thick with torch smoke and damp wool, the low rumble of men speaking half-murmured oaths and ill tidings. Robb Stark stood at the heart of it, hands braced on the scarred oaken table, eyes fixed on the painted map of the Seven Kingdoms. The banners clustered behind him were gray and green and black, dire wolves and trout and flayed men glimmering in firelight. The Riverlands, the North, the Boltons, the Karstarks, every scrap of strength that still answered when the young king in the North called. Yet beyond the carved wooden hills, lions prowled. "Renly Baratheon is dead," Catelyn Stark said, her voice cutting through the murmur like a whetstone over steel. "Struck down in his own tent, his banners broken, his lords scattered." A shiver passed through the hall, a sound like wind along the battlements. Robb lifted his head. His mother's face was lined with fatigue and grief he knew too well, but her eyes were steady. "Dead," Great John Umber thundered. "The Green Boy? How in the seven bloody hells?" "Some say sorcery," said Roose Bolton, pale eyes hooded, hands folded calmly before him. "Others say it was the work of shadows and queens. Men will say anything when they lose. Stannis Baratheon claims it was his justice," Edmure Tully added, jaw tight. "He sends ravens to every lordling with a scrap of land, naming himself the one true king. He marches on King's Landing now that Renly's host is broken." "And the Tyrells?" Robb asked. That was the name he had been waiting for. House Tyrell of Highgarden, Renly's flowered host. "Returned to Bitterbridge," Catelyn said. "They took their horses and their banners and their grief, and they went home to count their losses. But they will not stay idle for long. The Reach is rich, and Mace Tyrell is not a man to watch wars pass him by." Murmurs swelled again, men weighing the Reach against the Westerlands, the Roses against the Lions. Robb could see it as clearly as if the stones were already painted on his map. Fields heavy with grain, rivers that never froze, orchards bending with fruit. A land that had never known true winter. "We should fear their next move," Roose Bolton said. "The Lannisters will not sit without allies. Tywin is not so proud he will scorn the Reach if he thinks he can buy it." Robb's fingers curled against the table, knuckles paling. Tywin Lannister with the golden harvest of the Reach at his back, the might of Highgarden married to Casterly Rock. That thought was an iron band around his chest. Catelyn watched him, and he felt the weight of her gaze as surely as he felt the weight of the crown he did not yet wear upon his brow. "They will sell their swords to the highest bidder," she said, "or to the suitor who can give them the greatest claim to power." Robb looked up from the painted map. Somewhere, beyond the gray smudge that marked the trident and the green sweep that meant the Reach, there was a girl who had called herself Renly's queen for a heartbeat of time. Margaery Tyrell, a rose who had reached for a stag and found only shadow. "Then we must not leave them to the lions," he said. The solar smelled of beeswax and parchment and the faint lingering trace of Ned Stark's memory. Catelyn sat at the small writing table by the window, quill in hand, ink gathering fat and black at its tip. Beyond the glass, the rain had softened to a mist that clung to the river like breath to a looking glass. The letter before her was no longer blank. Each stroke upon the parchment felt like a stone laid upon her own shoulders. Lady Olenna of House Tyrell, called the Queen of Thorns. She had never met the woman, but she had heard enough. Sharp as a dagger and twice as quick. A mind that had made and unmade crowns while men boasted of winning battles. Catelyn could not help but imagine another woman of a great house who saw further than the men around her. In another life, they might have sat beside the same hearth and spoken their fears in quiet voices while snow fell beyond the walls. Instead, they traded words that might change kingdoms. King in the North, they had named her son, and to win that name Catelyn had climbed the steps of the twins and bartered him like a piece in a game. One of Lord Walder's daughters, she had told herself then. Pretty or plain, clever or dull, she will be his duty and his shield. She had promised the old spider of the Green Fork that Robb would wed his blood and so secure the crossing. Now, her quill hovered above the phrase she had written twice and scratched out twice more. And in recognition of the grave wrong already done to your noble house by the death of Lord Renly Baratheon, my son, Robb of House Stark, king in the north and of the Trident, would make honorable and lasting alliance with your house through marriage to your granddaughter, the Lady Margaery. She could almost hear Walder Frey's reedy voice, thin and sharp, hissing accusations. Oathbreaker, traitor. If she set her seal to this letter, she would be the one who had led Robb into perjury. The shame would be hers as much as his. Yet when she closed her eyes, she saw the Lannister lion rampant over Winterfell's broken walls. She saw Sansa in silk chains in King's Landing, Arya's face lost in the crowd, Bran and Rickon vanished, their fates a tangle in the dark. The Freys gave a bridge. The Tyrells could give them wheat and steel and numbers beyond counting. "I am sorry," she whispered to the cold air, not sure whether she spoke to Walder Frey, to the gods, or to Ned. "But I will not see our children starve and freeze because of one old man's wounded pride." The quill descended, ink bit into parchment. The words flowed, neat and composed, betraying none of the tremor in her chest. When she finished, she sprinkled sand across the page, shook it off, then pressed the direwolf seal into the warm red wax beside the Trout of House Tully. When she lifted the seal, Robb's future lay upon the table between her hands. Highgarden in spring was a world away from war. The air was sweet with rose and lemon blossom, bees busying themselves among the flowers as if kings had never risen or fallen. Margaery walked with her arm hooked lightly through her grandmother's, her skirts whispering over the stone path. "Another raven from the north?" Olenna said, her cane tapping the ground in time with her words. "I am beginning to suspect they breed them in the snow as they do wolves." Margaery smiled, though her gaze had drifted past the hedges to the distant tilt yard, where knights in green and gold practiced with blunted lances. "Robb Stark," she said, tasting the name. "They call him the Young Wolf. They call him that because they have never seen him in person." Olenna snorted. "Boys with crowns are all the same under their furs and breastplates. Loud when they win, ugly when they lose, and stupid most of the time." Yet she did not discard the scroll. Her thin fingers had tightened on it as soon as the maester had brought it, and she had read it twice before saying anything at all. "What does he offer?" Margaery asked, keeping her tone light. Once, she had dreamt of being a queen beside Renly Baratheon, all golden banners and soft laughter. Those dreams had died in a black tent by a shadow's hand. But dreams were stubborn things. They flowered again in the cracks of grief. "What every man offers when he is desperate," Olenna answered. "Alliance, bread, blood." Her eyes, sharp as thorns, slid to her granddaughter's face. "And marriage." Margaery slowed. A breeze lifted a loose curl from her cheek, cool against skin warmed by the sun. She had expected it, perhaps even hoped, but hearing the words spoken aloud still set something fluttering in her chest. "Is he desperate?" she asked. "They are all desperate now," Olenna said. "The north is too far and too poor to stand alone forever, and this boy has made enemies of lions and krakens and old fools on riverbanks." She tapped the scroll. "Yet he wins his battles. He is not his father, but they say he has Eddard Stark's sternness and his own wolf's cunning. And he is not Renly," Margaery thought, with the quiet ache of a wound no longer fresh but not yet scarred. Renly had been all charm and grace, a summer king. Stark would be winter made flesh. "What would you have me do, grandmother?" she asked. Olenna stopped beside a rosebush heavy with pale blooms and pinched off a blossom without asking leave of the gardener. "I would have you stop mooning over dead stags," she said briskly, "and think like a Tyrell. The lion is proud, but the north is vast. If we tie our roots around those stones, we might climb higher than any of them. Stark offers you a crown in the snow. Lannister would offer you one in filth." She set the rose into Margaery's hand. The petals were cool, dewy. "You wanted to be a queen, child. Not for the jewels, I hope, but for the power to keep our people fed and safe. There is more than one throne in this realm, even if the singers forget to mention them." Margaery looked down at the rose, then up at the distant horizon, where the green of the reach melted into the bluish haze of far-off hills. She imagined castles of gray stone, godswoods heavy with snow, halls where men wore furs instead of silk, a hard land but clean. "If I marry him," she said softly, "I would be far from home." Olenna's hand, dry and strong, squeezed her arm. "The roots will follow you," she said. "We are Tyrells. We climb wherever we are planted." Margaery turned the rose between her fingers, imagining its petals rimed with frost. "Then write to him," she said. "Tell the young wolf that the rose will hear his suit." The light was thin and blue when the raven came, its wings slick with river mist. Robb had been watching the men practice in the yard below, gray wind pacing the battlements at his heels, when the maester's boy hurried up the stone steps with the bird on his arm. "A message from the Reach, your grace," the boy said, breath clouding in the chill. Robb took the tube, feeling the weight of wax and parchment as though it were something far heavier. The seal was a golden rose upon a field of green. He broke it with his thumb. The words were crisp and polite, the hand a neat southern script. Yet beneath the courtesy, he could feel the steel of the mind that had shaped them. "Lord Robb of House Stark, King in the North and of the Trident, owing to the grievous loss suffered by our house in the untimely and unnatural death of Lord Renly Baratheon, whose memory is held most dear by my granddaughter, I, Olenna of House Tyrell, write to you with an open mind to the alliance you propose. Your victories against House Lannister and your known honor weigh in your favor. The Reach does not ally lightly, nor does it join its blood to those who are faithless. If we are to bind our houses, certain assurances will be required as to the security of the North and the Trident, and protections for the small folk who will bear the weight of such a union. My son, Lord Mace Tyrell, is prepared to send envoys to treat with you at a place of mutual safety. Should terms be agreed upon, my granddaughter, the Lady Margaery, will willingly accept the duties of a wife and queen, and stand beside you in winter and in summer. Unkind tongues have called me the Queen of Thorns, your grace. Consider this letter a rose stem. There is sweetness if one takes care in how one grasps it. Olenna of House Tyrell. Robb read it twice, then a third time, each phrase sinking deeper. King in the North. She had used the title as casually as if it had always existed, as if the Iron Throne were only one chair among many. "So?" Edmure asked, hovering like a boy waiting for news of a tourney. "Do they spit in our faces or kiss our hands?" "Neither," Robb said, folding the parchment with care. Gray wind brushed against his leg, uneasy at his tension. "They will talk. Olenna Tyrell will send envoys. Perhaps Mace himself. And the girl?" Gretchen's voice boomed from behind them as he came up the steps 2 at a time. "The one who thought herself a queen already? She will come if terms are struck," Robb said. He had never seen Margaery Tyrell, only heard of her. Renly's pretty little bride, all dimples and charity, smiling in the shadow of a stolen crown. Yet the letter did not feel like the work of a foolish girl. Catelyn climbed the last of the steps, her breath misting in the cold. She had eyes for the parchment at once. "What does she say?" "That they will treat with us," Robb said. He did not yet speak of small folk and protections and delicate assurances. Those would come later, in council where every word could be weighed. "That, if we can come to terms, the Lady Margaery will wed me." His mother's shoulders slumped with a relief so sharp it was almost pain. For a heartbeat, he saw her as he had when he was a boy, not as the woman who bartered treaties and defied kings, but as the Lady of Winterfell who had stood beside Ned in the Godswood. "Then we must ensure terms are struck," she said, "before Tywin Lannister thinks to send his own offers south." Robb looked out over the river, where the mist was lifting to reveal the slow, brown current. Somewhere to the south lay fields of endless green and a girl whose face he could not yet imagine. Duty, he reminded himself. He had taken up a sword for the North, and the weight of steel was no heavier than the weight of a crown, or of a wife he had never seen. "Send word to the lords to gather in the hall," he said. "If I am to marry a rose, The wolfswood must know what it costs. They gathered as they always did, around the same scarred table that had known Hoster Tully's counsels and Edmure's fumbling attempts at command. Only now, the boy who stood at its head wore no lord's mantle but the invisible mantle of a king, and the map before them held not only rivers and fords but futures. Robb laid Olenna's letter beside the carved mountains. "House Tyrell is willing to ally," he said. "They will send envoys to treat. If we can find common ground, they offer their strength, their grain, and the hand of Lady Margaery." Greatjon let out a low whistle. "The girl who warmed Renly's bed," he said. "Bold of her to seek a colder one." "Do not speak of her so," Catelyn said, sharp. "She is not chattel to be passed from man to man, but a lady of a great house." "She is both," Roose Bolton observed, his tone mild. "As are we all commodities in the eyes of those who trade in crowns." Ricard Karstark's face was thunder. "We swore to Walder Frey," he said. "Your mother made that bargain in your name, your grace. You promised one of his daughters in marriage. Will you throw that oath aside?" Robb felt the accusation like a knife. The memory of the twins rose unbidden. The stink of the river, the leering mouths of Frey girls lined up like horses at market. His mother's desperate eyes. He had agreed. He had nodded, stiff and numb and furious, and bound himself to a man he despised because his army needed to cross a bridge. "I remember my oaths," he said quietly. "So do the Freys," Karstark said. "You ask us to bleed and die beside you in the name of honor. What is that honor worth if you can toss aside your plighted word the moment a prettier bride appears?" "Prettier and richer," Greatjon said, unrepentant. "Not that I care how her face is made. Give me a queen who can fill my belly and my wine cup, and she'll be fine enough." Roose steepled his fingers. "If we bind ourselves to House Tyrell, we gain the Reach's harvests. Our men will not starve when winter comes. We gain their cavalry, their ships, their influence in Old Town. We deny these things to Tywin Lannister. The Freys give us a crossing. The Tyrells offer us a realm." Karstark slammed a fist upon the table. "And what of your father, your grace? How would Eddard Stark have treated his oath?" Robb's cheeks burned. "My father is dead," he said. "His honor lives in what I do now. He would not have me lead the North to ruin to keep a bargain with a man like Walder Frey." "And what will Walder do when you spurn him?" Catelyn asked, her voice tight. "He is proud and sly, and he counts real and imagined slights as other men count coin. He will not forgive this easily." Robb met her gaze. "If we are strong enough," he said, "he will have no choice but to swallow his bile. We will pay him what gold and titles we can spare. We will compensate his slighted daughter with a better match. But I will not bind my people's fate to a crumbling bridge when a fortress is offered." Silence fell. The fire popped, sending a small shower of sparks up the chimney. At last, Greatjon barked a laugh. "Spoken like a king," he said. "Let the old weasel howl. He owes us more than we owe him. With the Reach at our side, we could piss in the mander and call it wine." Karstark did not laugh. His eyes remained cold as river ice, but he said no more. Roose inclined his head, pale lips curving just so. "Then we must plan for the consequences," he said. "For Frey's anger, for Lannister's fear, for Tyrell's ambition. Allies today may be rivals tomorrow." Robb nodded. "We prepare," he said, "for all of it." He pressed his hand flat on the map again. The painted wolf emblazoned over the north met the rose of the Reach where his fingers covered them. "Send word to the Reach. Tell them we will meet their envoys and speak of marriage." They chose a small, stout castle on the borderlands, where no banner flew higher than another and the walls had seen more traitors than kings. The lord of the place nearly choked on his own breath when he learned who would stand beneath his rafters. But he set his hall in order and had every flagstone scrubbed until it shone. Robb arrived first. His host encamped in the fields beyond the walls, gray banners snapping in the sharp wind. The castle felt cramped after Riverrun, its courtyard narrow, its keep low and thick. Yet there was a comfort in its plainness, a reminder of lesser days when he had known only Winterfell's steady stones. He waited in the hall with Catelyn at his side, Edmure and Great John behind, Grey Wind lying at his feet. The direwolf's yellow eyes watched the door with the same wariness as the men. The Tyrells came in a shimmer of color and sound. Mail shirts under embroidered surcoats, green cloaks edged in gold, the hum of southern voices. Loras Tyrell walked at their head, a white cloak clasped at his shoulder despite the lack of Kingsguard around him now, his beauty as cold as honed steel. Beside him, a smaller figure in emerald and sable moved with quiet grace. Margaery Tyrell was not the painted doll Robb had half expected from rumors of Renly's camp. She was smaller than he had imagined, her features fine and composed, hair the rich brown of chestnuts rather than the shining gold of Lannister tails. Her gown was modest by southern standards, high-necked, the fabric thick enough for the northern air, but fur lay across her shoulders, soft gray that made him think of Winterfell's gods would cloaked in snow. She stopped when she reached the foot of the dais. Her eyes met his, and he felt a jolt as if a sword had struck his shield. They were clever eyes, assessing and aware, but there was warmth in them too, a spark that was not calculation alone. "Your Grace," she said, dipping in a curtsy that was deep enough to honor his title without being servile. "I am Margaery of House Tyrell. I thank you for granting us safe conduct." "Lady Margaery," he answered, forcing his voice not to catch. "Welcome. The North honors those who keep their word." Their hands met briefly as she rose. Her fingers were cool, her grip steady. There was a faint scent of roses about her, but beneath it he thought he caught another note. Ink, perhaps, or parchment burned in candlelight. The smell of someone who spent as much time at tables as in gardens. Loras's gaze on him was sharp, protective. "My sister has traveled far," the knight said. "We trust that your hospitality will not falter." "My men know the laws of guest right," Robb said. "No harm will come to you under this roof." Grey Wind stirred, making a low sound in his throat. Margaery's eyes flicked down, widening slightly as she took in the size of the direwolf. Instead of recoiling, she inclined her head to the beast as if to another lord. "So this is Grey Wind," she murmured. "The singers in Highgarden make him into a shadow or a ghost, all teeth and darkness. But he is more like your house sigil made flesh, is he not?" Robb felt a thin line of tension ease in his shoulders. "He is himself," he said, "as am I." Margaery smiled, just a little. "Then perhaps, in time, we will learn what that means." The feast that followed their meeting was careful and restrained. Every toast weighed, every jest measured. Northern ale met Reach wine, hearty stews set beside delicate tarts. Men who had never seen the Mander tried olives for the first time and pretended not to grimace. For all the laughter, there was a tautness beneath it, like a bowstring drawn and waiting. Robb escaped when he could. He found the narrow stair that led up the side of the keep and climbed until the sounds of the hall were only a dull murmur beneath him. The air on the ramparts was knife-cold, the wind carrying the smells of wood smoke and horse and damp earth from the camps below. He thought he was alone until he saw the shift of a cloak by the crenellations. "Your Grace," Margaery said, turning. Her hair was down now, loosed from its intricate braids, falling in soft waves over her mantle. The wind toyed with it, lifting strands that caught the starlight. "I hope I have not trespassed on some northern rite by coming up here." Robb felt suddenly awkward, like a boy caught in the armory. "You are our guest," he said. "You trespass nowhere. I only came to breathe air that hasn't been through a dozen men's lungs." She laughed softly. "The hall is warm, but it is close," she admitted. "I am used to gardens when I need to think. Highgarden has more than we can use." She glanced out at the fields. Here, the sky seems the garden. The stars spooled across the black, far brighter than over King's Landing's smoke or Old Town's lamps. Robb leaned his arms on the cold stone. Below them, fires pricked the darkness where his men lay. Beyond, the Tyrell camp was a glimmer of softer light, more ordered, like beads on a string. "You must find it very different," he said. "All this." He gestured to the rough battlements, the encamped host, the bare, wind-scoured hills. "I find it honest," Margaery said. "King's Landing is full of shadows. Here, the shadows belong to real things, stone and men and wolves." She folded her hands atop the wall. "I knew what I was when I married Lord Renly. My father and grandmother did not lie to me. I was a piece on the board, but I chose to be one. I wanted to play. And now?" Robb asked. "Now the board has changed," she said. "And I must decide if I would rather sit on a shelf and gather dust in Highgarden, or take my place again." Her eyes met his steady. "I will not pretend my hand is not part of the bargain being discussed. But I would like to know the man whose life it will be bound to." He felt a faint flush rise beneath his beard. No southern coyness, no simpering. She spoke of herself as plainly as any northern lord, but with an awareness he had rarely seen at his war councils. "What do you want to know?" he asked. Margaery tilted her head, considering. "Do you truly mean to keep the North and the Trident as an independent kingdom?" she said. "Olenna wrote that you do, that you would not bend the knee to Joffrey or Stannis or any other who claims the Iron Throne." "I do," Robb said, the answer coming as easily as breath. "The men who raised me up did it for that reason. They were tired of southern kings who did not know their names, yet demanded their lives." "And will you remember their names?" she asked quietly. The question settled between them. Robb thought of the boys he had led across rivers and into fire, the men who had shouted his name on muddy fields. "I try," he said, "at night when I cannot sleep." "Good." She nodded, as if he had passed a test only she knew of. "Because if I stand beside you as queen of whatever throne we call it, I would have my people know that their king and queen see them as more than numbers on a census roll." "You speak as if it is decided," he said. Margaery's smile was small but real. "It is not," she said. "But I have looked at Joffrey Baratheon and Stannis and seen what sort of kings they will be. I have heard of Tywin Lannister. I would rather stand beside a wolf who worries at his conscience than a lion who has none." Wind tugged at his cloak. Somewhere far below, a dire wolf howled, long and low. Margaery turned her face to the sound, lips parted. "It seems," she said, "that the North sings to its kings. Highgarden will have to learn the tune." Catelyn had never loved the makeshift septs of war, the way they smelled of travel and fear, canvas and old incense. Yet she went to this one as a thirsty woman went to a well, moving through the hushed camp long after the last cup in the hall had been drained. The Sept was a commandeered storeroom off the hall. Its walls hung with hastily painted images of the Seven. The mother's face was smudged where some soldier's clumsy thumb had brushed her cheek. A few candles guttered before the statues, their wax pooling like melted bone. Catelyn knelt, the cold of the stone floor seeping through her skirts. Her hands found each other, fingers interlaced, knuckles pressing white. "Mother, guide him," she murmured. "Father, let justice be done. Warrior, give him strength. Crone, grant him wisdom enough to know when to listen." Ned had always respected the old gods of the North more than the Seven, but he had never tried to pull her from her faith. They had knelt together before weirwood and altar in their time, each giving the other's gods the courtesy of their silence. Now, in the flicker of candle flame, she saw his face as she had last seen it in Winterfell, half-shadowed as he rode south with the king who would kill him. She had bargained for Robb's path as much as any man. It had been her choice to go to the twins, her voice that had promised Walder Frey what she had no right to promise. Now she had written another promise, one that would break the first. "Have I done right?" she asked the carved faces. They stared back, painted eyes unblinking. "I have sent letters like swords into the dark. I have loosed my son into a war he did not seek, and now I offer his hand to a woman he has never known." The mother's image was chipped at the corner of the mouth. It made her smile look a little askew, as if amused and sad in equal measure. "They say she is kind," Catelyn whispered. that she feeds the poor and visits the sick, that she can soften hearts in King's Landing, which is more than any of us could do. If she comes north, will she understand the cold? The long nights? Will she stand beside my son when the songs of war have faded and only the work remains? The counting of grain, the burying of dead, the mending of walls. She thought of Sansa, with her head full of tales, learning too late that kings and queens were made of flesh and rot and secrets. Of Arya, wild and feral, somewhere out there in a world she could not see. Of Bran and Rickon, their fates a knot that refused to come undone in her mind. If I can bring him allies who will keep them safe, she said. If I can give the North a queen who will care for it as I have cared, is that worth one old man's anger? Will you forgive me for breaking my word to Walder Frey, if it spares us from worse? No answer came, of course. The gods, old and new, were ever silent. Yet as she knelt, the distant sound of singing drifted in, the rough, tuneless harmony of northern voices raised in a camp song. They sang of snow and home and a gray direwolf running through the woods. Catelyn let the sound fill her, pushing back the echo of Frey's reedy promises. She rose only when the last candle had burned low, its wick hissing in its own cooled wax. They wed in the great hall of Riverrun, beneath beams that had watched Tullis be born and buried for generations. War left little room for splendor, but what could be spared was gathered. Candles and iron sconces, garlands of river flowers and early autumn leaves twined together, tables laid with what food the stewards could scrape from storerooms and captured wagons. The Septon's voice echoed off the stone as he intoned the rites. Father, smith, warrior, mother, maiden, crone, and stranger, hear us now and look with favor upon this man and this woman. Robb stood straight, his breath slow and measured. The hall seemed to swim around him, faces blurring at the edges, save for the one before him. Margaery had chosen her gown carefully. The bodice was stitched with silver-threaded roses whose petals deepened to gray at the tips, as if touched by frost. A mantle of direwolf fur lay over her shoulders, the soft pelt clasped with a small golden rose. It was a union writ in cloth, south and north, summer and winter. Her hair was braided in the northern style, simpler than the elaborate coils he had glimpsed in King's Landing lords' daughters, but a wreath of white river flowers crowned her head. If she felt the chill of the hall, she did not show it. Who comes before the seven to wed this woman? The Septon asked. Catelyn stepped forward. I do, she said, voice steady. Catelyn of House Tully, of House Stark by marriage. And do you swear that she comes of her own free will? The Septon asked. I swear it, Margaery said herself, before her new good mother could answer. There was a spark of mischief in her eyes, quickly smoothed into propriety, but Robb caught it and felt the corner of his own mouth twitch in answer. Who comes before the seven to wed this man? The Septon asked. Edmure moved up beside Robb, looking both proud and slightly bewildered at the weight of the moment. I do, he said. Edmure of House Tully, Lord of Riverrun. And do you swear that he comes of his own free will? Robb met Margaery's gaze. I do, he said. They knelt as the Septon draped a length of cloth over their joined hands. The fabric was plain, but someone, Catelyn, he suspected, had stitched a small direwolf and a rose at either end. In sight of gods and men, the Septon said, I do solemnly declare Robb of House Stark and Margaery of House Tyrell to be man and wife, one flesh, one heart, one soul, now and forever. Cursed be the one who comes between them. The words settled over Robb like snow, cold and inexorable. He felt the weight of them settle not only on his shoulders but on hers as well. One flesh, one heart, one soul. It was more than alliance, more than ink on parchment. Margaery's fingers tightened around his as they rose. The hall erupted in cheers and the clash of cups, the stomp of boots on stone. The king in the north, men roared. The Rose Queen of Winter. The title was new, ugly, and beautiful at once. Robb looked at Margaery and saw her taking it in, weighing it as she would any piece on the board. She turned to him, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. My lord husband, she said. Or must I call you Your Grace, even in private?" "In private," he said, surprising himself. "You may call me Robb, if you wish." Her smile in that moment was not the smile of a queen showing grace to her subjects, but of a woman whose path had at last taken a shape she could see. "Then it is Robb," she said, "and you must call me Margaery, not my lady or your grace. We must begin as we mean to go on, must we not?" He bowed his head a little, as if accepting terms of peace. "As you say," he replied. "Margaery." The feast blurred into a whirl of sound and taste and motion. Robb lost count of how many toasts were drunk, how many times Great John bellowed for someone to sing. Northern songs of ice and iron clashed with southern ballads of flowers and wine, the melodies wrestling like dogs until, to everyone's surprise, they began to blend. Margaery moved through it all with an ease that made it seem as though she had been born in a hall of stone rather than among Highgarden's vines. She smiled at the right jests, laughed at the right moments, asked after men's wives and sons with a precision that made them feel remembered. When a serving girl stumbled and nearly dropped a trencher at her feet, Margaery caught her elbow, steadying her, and spoke softly enough that the girl's face bloomed with relief rather than fear. "She sees them," Catelyn murmured to Robb at one point, watching as Margaery coaxed a story from a grizzled Karstark man-at-arms about a winter 3 years past. "Not just the lords, the others. She has had practice," Robb said. He thought of King's Landing, of the eyes and hands and hunger that city bred. There, if you do not see first, you are the one who is not seen. Loras Tyrell kept his watch from a little way down the table, every movement of his sisters noted. When Robb's gaze met his, there was no warmth in it, only appraisal and warning. "You hold what I once swore to protect," those eyes said. "Do not break it." Robb met that look without flinching. He had a sister, too, somewhere in the world, and daughters of his own to imagine now, perhaps, wearing cloaks of fur and garlands of roses. He understood protective rage as well as any knight. When the first course had been cleared and musicians struck up another tune, Margaery leaned closer to him. "They are not so different, you know," she said, nodding toward where Great John and a reach lord with a wine-reddened nose were arguing over whose home brewed the stronger drink. "My father's bannermen bellow and boast just as loudly. Only their oaths are to wheat and wine, not to snow and stone." "And would you trade one for the other?" he asked. "I have," she said simply, "and I think I may yet find this bargain worth the cost." He studied her profile, the strong line of her nose, the curve of her mouth. She did not look like Sansa or Catelyn or any woman of the North he had known. Yet there was a steadiness in the way she held herself, a refusal to be cowed by the weight of the hall that reminded him of his mother. "There will be hard days ahead," he said. The words came out more somber than he'd meant. "The Lannisters will not sit idle while we braid our banners together. The Freys," he stopped himself. There would be time enough to speak of Freys. Margaery's hand, resting on the table between them, curled slightly. "I know," she said. "I do not mistake this for some tale of knights and maidens. I have seen what kings do when they are frightened, and what men become when they are hungry. If I must wear a crown, I would rather do it where the lie is smallest." Robb frowned. "What do you mean?" "In King's Landing," she said, "they pretend that the king's word is law and that all obey from love or duty. Here you make no such pretense. The men follow you because they believe you will keep them alive through winter. If you fail, they will die, and that will be the end of it. There is less ornament." He huffed a quiet laugh. "We are not much for ornament in the North." "Then perhaps," Margaery said, her eyes meeting his, "the North and I will suit one another better than some think." He looked out over the hall. For the first time in many months, he saw not just grizzled faces and worn armor, but the faint outline of something else, a realm that might be knit from stone and soil and seed, held together not only by fear or hatred but by the simple need to endure. Outside, he knew the rivers ran on, indifferent to kings or vows. Far away, lions plodded, and an old man on a bridge would soon hear of a slight that would fester in him like rot. Storms gathered beyond their sight, and in the far, cold north, other things moved in the dark. But here, for this night, in this hall, a rose had been bound to a wolf. The game had changed, and the board would never look the same again. Dawn came gray and low over Riverrun, dragging a shroud of mist from the river to curl around the walls. The courtyard rang with the clatter of steel and the bark of commands. Men moved like shadows in the fog, the shapes of their shields and helms blurring until rose and wolf and trout were all one color. Margaery Tyrell watched from the stone balcony, gloved hands resting lightly on the cold parapet. Below, a northern spearman in patched mail slammed the butt of his shield into the chest of a reach knight in leaf-embroidered surcoat, driving him back across the slick flagstones. The knight recovered, twisting, his sword flicking out in a clean riposte that would have cut the man's throat if the blade had been real. "Again," called the master-at-arms, his voice carrying over the clang. "These men of yours fight like winter," said a voice at her shoulder. Robb Stark had come up so quietly she had not heard him. He stood with his arms folded, cloak drawn around him, hair damp with the morning's chill. There was a faint stubble along his jaw, the first sign that he had not slept as he should. "Winter," Margaery echoed, amused. "I would have said they fight like men who have been knocked in the mud too often to risk their footing." "That too," Robb conceded. His eyes were on the men below, but there was pride in the angle of his mouth. "You see the way they plant their feet? They are always thinking of the ice. Even on stone like this, it is habit. They expect the ground to betray them if they are careless." "Your reach knights are quicker," Margaery said, "but they overreach. They trust the weight of their horses, the strength of their mail. They do not imagine the earth itself can be an enemy." She watched as one of her father's bannermen, young Ser Haber Redwine, lunged too far, his boots slipping on damp moss. His opponent, a Karstark man with a broken nose, used the opening without hesitation, knocking him flat. "They will learn," she said, "if they wish to live long enough to ride home again." Robb glanced sideways at her. "You speak as if you have seen many men learn or die." "I watched Lord Renly's camp," Margaery replied, keeping her tone light, though the memory lay like a bruise beneath the words. "I saw Southron lords strut in silk and gold, never thinking that shadows could kill a king. I saw them break after, like sugar in the rain. I would prefer that our men," she caught herself, corrected without stumbling, "that your men do not shatter at the first true storm." "Our men," he repeated. There was no mockery in it, no challenge, only quiet acceptance. "If we are to bind kingdoms, they had better be ready to bleed for the same cause." She lifted her chin a fraction. "And to eat as well," she said. "The first grain wagons from the Reach will reach the crossings within a fortnight, if the roads hold. I have made certain the caravans are accompanied by enough spears that no lion banner can pick them off." "You have done that?" Robb asked, turning to her fully now. "I am my grandmother's granddaughter," Margaery said. "Do you think she would let me travel without learning how bread truly reaches a table? The men in your tent speak of hunger, Robb. They are too proud to say it when you stand before them, but they grumble loud enough when they think no one listens. Give them full bellies, and they will endure another winter for you." He studied her as if she were some new front opening on a map, unexpected but suddenly vital. "We have always stretched our stores," he said. "The North knows hardship." "Yes," she said gently, "but hardship shared with no hope breeds bitterness. You are asking them to fight a war that is not theirs alone. The Riverlords will not forgive Casterly Rock for what was done to their fields. The Reach fears famine as much as Lannister gold. Tell them that you fight for all of it, for bread as much as banners." Below them, gray wind trotted into the yard, snout lifted to sniff the air. Margaery watched as the great direwolf padded between men at drill, his mere presence opening a space around him. A Reachman flinched. A Northman grinned, reaching down to scratch the beast behind the ear when it passed. "You asked me last night what I meant to do as queen," she said. "Let this be your first sign. I will see that your men are fed and paid. that the small folk know who sends the grain and who keeps the roads safe. A rose climbs best when it has something solid to cling to. And if the stone it binds to begins to crack? Robb asked. Then we shore it up, Margaery said. Or we grow roots so deep no crack can break us. By midday, the hall smelled of wax and wet leather and men who had ridden hard with news. The great map that had belonged to Hoster Tully was unrolled again, its edges curling where old damp had bitten it. Stones and carved tokens weighted its corners. A dire wolf for the north, a trout for the Riverlands, a golden lion for the Westerlands, a stag, still lingering over the painted stormlands like a ghost that had not yet accepted its own death. Robb stood at the head of the table, hands braced as he had on a dozen battle mornings. Margaery sat just to his right, not at his side as if she were a lady at ease, but slightly back, a quill and a blank sheet before her. No one had invited her to sit. She had taken the chair when it became clear she meant to listen, and no one had yet dared to ask her to leave. Our scouts report that Tywin Lannister has pulled his main host back toward Harrenhal, Roose Bolton said, his fingers tracing a slow path along the painted river. He leaves smaller forces to harry the Riverlands, but his core strength is no longer here. He runs. Great John barked a laugh. The old lion tucks his tail between his legs and scampers back to his carrion nest. He is not running, Roose corrected. He is thinking. Harrenhal is a better seat from which to watch both King's Landing and the Trident. From there, he can strike at Stannis if he wins, or secure retreat if he loses. And should we advance too far without securing our lines, he could cut us from the north entirely. Then we must choose our direction, Robb said. If Tywin draws back to Harrenhal, we have a clear road west. The Westerlands are soft-bellied. We could strike at their mines, their ports. Lannisport lies here. He tapped the shield-shaped bay. If we burn their ships and take their gold, we cut their claws. A bold stroke, said a deep, measured voice. Randall Tarley stood opposite, hard eyes like stones sunk in a craggy face. The Lord of Horn Hill had come north with a small but disciplined force, answering Mace Tyrell's summons despite his disdain for what he had called summer nights. His approval now, grudging as it was, carried weight. But bold strokes fail if the arm is overextended, he went on. The farther we push into the Westerlands, the longer our supply lines grow. Your Grace, with respect, Riverland roads in autumn are worse than anything in the Reach. We would be bogged down while Lord Tywin moves with his core host along firmer ground. We do not walk alone, Margaery said, speaking for the first time. Heads turned. Surprise flickered in some eyes, annoyance in others, curiosity in a few. The Redwine fleet is moving north along the western coast. Lord Paxter will not risk his ships without cause, but with our banners at Lannisport, he has a safe harbor for resupply. We need not march everything by road. Your lady wife is well informed on naval matters, Roose observed. His tone gave nothing away, but his eyes weighed her as he might weigh a man whose cloak he considered stealing. Margaery did not flinch. My father cannot tell starboard from stern, she said. Someone had to pay heed while the Redwines boasted. The Reach lives from the sea as much as the soil. It would be folly not to learn the language of both. Robb hid a smile. If we strike west, he said, we force Tywin to choose between turning to defend his own lands or riding south to break Stannis Baratheon. Either way, he cannot be everywhere. We exploit that. And if Stannis loses before we have finished gutting the Westerlands, Ricard Karstark demanded. If the Red Priest's fires fail him and Joffrey holds the city, then we stand with our backs to the sea, fat with Lannister gold and nowhere to spend it but on our own funerals. The board was crowded. Each move brushed against three others. Margaery's quill scratched softly as she drew lines between the small, carved pieces. A rose near the Trident, a wolf at Riverrun, a lion perched over Casterly Rock. She wrote small notes beside them: grain, ships, loyalty, fear, numbers and names. Then we do not simply gut the Westerlands, she said, surprising them again. We bleed them where it counts. Lord Tarley is right. We do not have the luxury of time. Burn their ships, take their storehouses. Do not sit in their halls polishing their silver while their main host roams free. Strike hard and then fall back to positions we can hold. Hit and run. Great John scowled. We are not reavers. We would be wise if we learn from those who are, Roose said. The Ironborn understand that terror on the coasts can break a kingdom's spine as surely as any battle. They simply lack the discipline to do more than burn and boast. We could be more selective. You sound as if you admire them, Karstark said, lip curling. I admire results, Roose replied. Robb listened, weighing each argument like a sword in his hand. In the end, he straightened. We move west, he said, but not as conquerors seeking new castles to sit in while the world burns. We move like a knife, quick and deep, then gone. We will not let Tywin pin us. He looked at Margaery, meeting her gaze openly before the assembled lords. Send a raven to Lord Pax to Redwine, he said. Tell him that if he wishes to strike a blow against Casterly Rock, the time is coming. But he must be ready when we are, not when it suits him alone. Margaery inclined her head, the faintest smile curving her lips. Not triumph, but satisfaction at seeing a plan begin to take shape. At once, she said, I will write, and my grandmother will add her own thorns to the plea. Lord Paxter rarely ignores her when she pricks. All news in Westeros eventually found its way to Tywin Lannister, as water found the sea. The chamber he chose for his councils was high and windowless, torches guttering in iron brackets along the walls. Maps covered the table before him, layered so thickly that older campaigns hid under new, like bones beneath fresh soil. A raven scroll lay open at his elbow, its seals, wolf and rose, direwolf and flower, broken and pushed aside. Stark and Tyrell, he said. He did not ask if the report was true. The hand that had written it was one he knew, a minor Lannister cousin in the Reach whose skill lay not in arms but in listening. The words were plain. A wedding at Riverrun, a union of banners, Reach grain trains heading north under guard. Ser Adam Marbrand shifted uncomfortably. My lord, surely this is exaggerated. The Tyrells would not turn so sharply. They were ready to ally with us once the Baratheon situation was settled. Were they? Tywin asked softly. My son assured me that he had their loyalty in hand. Yet here we are. He thought of Tyrion in King's Landing, scuttling along the edges of power, clever and caustic and too fond of wine. Tyrion had been useful. It was his doing that Stannis Baratheon had been held at the Blackwater with wildfire and stone. But usefulness was not loyalty, and loyalty was not the same as control. The Tyrells have always sold their swords and their daughters where they see advantage, he said. They did it for Aerys, then for Robert, then for Renly. Why should we be surprised that they do it again for Stark? Marbrand opened his mouth, closed it. The Westerlands will not fall easily, he said instead. Even with the Reach at their backs, the Starks are stretched thin. They are children playing at crowns, said another voice. Kevan Lannister, dependable as ever. Robb Stark wins battles, but he does not yet understand the weight of the realm. A northern queen will not change that. Tywin's fingers tapped once on the table. Underestimate children if you like, he said. I have seen enough boys raised too quickly to power. They make mistakes, yes, but they move in ways their fathers never dared. Stark will not sit and wait for us to crush him. He has chosen an ally whose harvests can feed his armies and our enemies. That is not the act of a fool. He let the idea of it settle in the room like smoke. A free north, bound to the Reach with the Riverlands as their bridge. Snow and soil and grain. If they held, if they endured, it would not be a rebellion to be quashed but a rival realm on his doorstep. He still has weaknesses, Tywin said. He breaks oaths when it suits him. Walder Frey is a small man, but small men nursed on slights can become dangerous tools in the right hands. And the north is far. Winter comes. Even with Tyrell bred, their people will suffer if the snows are long. Then we must strike before they grow roots, Kevan said. Pull them up while they are still soft. Tywin nodded once. We cannot match the reach in grain or ships, he said, but we can sow doubt. Frey is our first stone. Send ravens to the twins. Tell Lord Walder that I grieve with him over his insult. Remind him that the crown repays its friends. Marbrand hesitated. My lord, do you mean to invite him to open rebellion against Stark? Tywin allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. I mean to offer him sympathy, he said. What he does with his resentment will be his own choice. But men like Walder Frey rarely need more than a gentle breeze to go where the wind already pushes them. He looked down at the map again. A wooden wolf token sat astride the trident. He moved a lion toward it, not to strike yet, but to lean close, shadowing the river crossing. And in King's Landing? Kevin asked. In King's Landing, my daughter will tighten her claws on the boy, Tywin said. Joffrey must not be given cause to provoke Tyrell wrath beyond what has already been done. They are lost to us for now, but their pride can still be used. A queen scorned is as dangerous as any lord. He rolled up the raven's letter, slow and deliberate, and fed it to the torch. Wax and parchment blackened, curled, and fell to ash. Stark believes a rose will soften his winter, Tywin said, more to himself than to those assembled. We shall see whether it blooms in snow or withers under lion's teeth. The twins crouched over the green fork like an old man's hands. Knuckles nodded, veins rising blue beneath papery skin. Inside the drafty hall, the old man himself sat hunched upon his carved chair, a fur thrown over his bony knees despite the lingering warmth of the Riverlands. Walder Frey squinted at the parchment in his hand. The Lannister seal hung from it, a blob of deep red wax stamped with a lion's head, already cracked where he had torn it open. So, he said, his voice a rasp. So. Around him, his brood muttered. Sons and grandsons, daughters and granddaughters, bastards and half-forgotten branches of his line. Frey faces as far as the eye could see, all with something of his small, sharp eyes and hungry mouths. What does it say, father? Asked Lothar Frey, plump and smiling, though his eyes were calculating. Has Lord Tywin taken notice at last? Dear Lord Walder, Walder mimicked in a warbling falsetto, sending a ripple of snickers through those close enough to hear. We at the court of King Joffrey Baratheon share your outrage at the slight done to your noble house by the king in the North's broken promise. He dropped the act, spitting the last words. Broken promise. He writes that as if it were news. House Stark has always thought itself above us, Black Walder said. He lounged against a pillar, one hand on his sword hilt. High and mighty Northerners, too good to keep their word to an old man. Old? Walder snapped, glaring. Old, am I? Old enough to remember when Casterly Rock begged for Frey help to cross these same bridges, and we gave it. Old enough to remember every slight I've ever been given, and there have been many. Lothar reached for the letter, and Walder slapped his hand away with surprising speed. Mine, he said. Tywin Lannister writes to me, not to you pack of pups. He scanned the lines again, lips moving silently. Tywin's words were smooth, offering nothing concrete, promising only remembrance and gratitude, respect for wrongs done, a shared understanding between men of consequence. Does he offer you gold? Asked one of the daughters, voice timid. He offers what every man offers, Walder said. Wind, but it is wind that blows in a direction I like. He tapped the parchment against his knee. Stark thinks he can piss on me and hand his cock to a rose instead. Well, lions do not like wolves. Perhaps they can be taught to hate roses, too. Black Walder grinned, a flash of teeth. Will you join Lord Tywin, then? He asked. Throw open the gates when the lions come? Don't be a fool, Walder snapped. There are no lions near my gates now, only wolves, and their bellies are empty enough to eat what I put before them. He leaned back in his chair, thin fingers drumming on the arm. No, he said, we will play the dutiful vassal. We will collect our tolls and bow when the North rides by. We will smile and nod and say how happy we are for the king in the north and his pretty new bride. His eyes glittered, bright and mean. And then, when the time is right, when they have forgotten that old Walder Frey still has teeth, we will decide how to use this sleight. Perhaps with lions. Perhaps with someone else. He shrugged, the fur sliding on his shoulders. Perhaps I will simply choke on it in my sleep. But until then, I will keep it in my cheek, like a bone. He crumpled Tywin's letter in his fist, not enough to tear it, only enough to crease the parchment, then smoothed it again. Send a polite reply, he told Lothar. Thank Lord Tywin for his concern. Assure him that House Frey is ever loyal to the Iron Throne. We have waited 70 years to be taken seriously. We can wait a little longer. Outside, the river slid between its banks, indifferent to old men's grudges and young men's wars. The smell in the healing hall was a thing of its own, sour sweat and old blood, sharp vinegar from the maester's jars, the tired sweetness of boiled willow bark. Margaery had known worse in the city of King's Landing, where sickness festered in alleys and corpses lay too long unclaimed. But this was a different miasma, heavier with iron and mud. Cots had been crammed into every corner of the long gallery. Men lay wrapped in blankets, some with arms in slings, others with bandaged stumps where legs had once been. A low murmur of pain and dream speech filled the air, occasionally punctuated by a cry when a wound was probed or a bone reset. Margaery moved between them with the sure-footedness of someone who had walked such rows before. A Sept trailed behind her, carrying a basket of clean cloths. In Margaery's own hands was a bowl of salve, an ointment of marigold and comfrey, thick and yellow, that she had learned to mix at Highgarden after a particularly nasty fall from a pony as a girl. "Your Grace," a man rasped as she approached. He tried to rise and flinched, hand flying to the bandage around his ribs. "Lie still, sire," she said. He was no sire, she saw on second glance. No spurs, no gilding on his gear piled at the foot of the cot, only the black sunburst and white field of House Karstark stitched roughly on his torn tunic. His beard was shot with gray, his eyes bloodshot but clear. "They told me you came," he said. "I thought they were making sport. Queens don't come where men stink like this." "Then your queens have been poorly taught," Margaery said, dipping her fingers into the salve. "May I?" He nodded, teeth gritted as she lifted the edge of his bandage. The wound beneath was ugly, a pucker of flesh where a spear had grazed too deep. Not fatal, the maester had said, if they kept it clean. "This will help with the inflammation," she said, smoothing the cool paste over angry skin. "And with the pain a little," he hissed, then let out a breath. "Better than wine," he admitted. "Though I wouldn't say no to both." She smiled. "I will see what can be done." "You shouldn't be here, Your Grace," he said then. "This isn't a place for women," she supplied. "Or for queens. For people who can still stand without swearing," he said. "The things you see, they don't leave you." "I know," she said quietly. Her hands did not falter. "I saw men half melted by wildfire in King's Landing. When Stannis came, I smelled flesh that would not stop burning. I listened to mothers wail when their sons did not come back from the Blackwater." She met his gaze. "I would rather see it and act than pretend it does not happen." His throat bobbed. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I meant no offense." "None taken." She wrapped the bandage again, careful not to pull too tight. "When the time comes, and you can stand and fight again, I would have you know who you are fighting for. Not just for a name shouted on the battlefield, but for a woman who will remember your face." He blinked at that, then chuckled, a sound like stones tumbling. "If my wife hears, she'll have my hide." "Then let us keep it between us," Margaery said, straightening. As she moved on, she caught sight of Great John Umber at the far end of the hall, his massive frame hunched awkwardly by the bedside of a younger man missing a hand. He glanced up, caught her eye, and gave her a short, respectful nod. "You have their tongues," Catelyn murmured when she joined Margaery in the doorway. "And their thanks." Margaery shook her head. "I have their stories," she said. That is more useful. The Karstark man told me his village has not seen a proper harvest in 2 years. The winter snows came early and stayed too long. His wife scraped mold from the bread to feed their children. When your ravens bring news of Reach grain arriving at White Harbor, I will know how much it matters. Catelyn studied her with a measuring look. You are not what I expected, she said. Nor you, my lady, Margaery replied. I thought the tales of the Tully fishwife who rode to barter with Walder Frey were exaggerations. They were not. A faint smile touched Catelyn's mouth. Fishwife? That was my grandmother's term, Margaery admitted. Do not worry. She called it with a certain admiration. Then perhaps we shall get along, Catelyn said. Her gaze drifted back into the hall. Thank you for coming here. The men will speak of it around their fires. It will do more to bind them to you than any crown. To us, Margaery corrected, gently but firmly. We must be bound together or not at all. The river outside the small solar whispered against the stones, a constant susurration that threaded through the silence between words. Someone, Catelyn likely, had insisted they be granted a room away from the bustle, someplace where they might think and speak without a dozen ears pricking at every pause. The table between them bore scars from years of use, knife gouges and ink stains, and a dark ring where a hot pot had once seared the wood. Tonight it held a different sort of mark. Maps weighted with ink bottles, letters from lords loyal and less so, a half-eaten crust of bread, 2 cups of wine. Robb traced a line with his finger along the map's western edge. Here, he said, Faircastle, Casterly Rock's western eyes. If we strike Lannisport, they will signal from there. But if the Redwine fleet can blockade, the Redwines will do as my grandmother prods them to, Margaery said. She had changed into a simpler gown, dark blue with only a scatter of silver leaves at the sleeves, her hair loose over her shoulders. The candlelight softened her, but there was nothing soft in her gaze as she considered the map. Lord Paxter is cautious, but he despises Tywin for the fleet he burned during Robert's rebellion. He will not turn down a chance to repay the debt. Robb smiled without humor. It seems everyone in this realm has cause to hate my enemies. Yet they have sat on their hands while we bleed. Fear breeds stillness, Margaery said. They feared Robert's wrath, then his death, then the chaos after. Now they fear what comes after Tywin. But if they see another power, one that can hold a line against Winter and Lion both, they will move. Faster than you might like. He studied her. You speak as if we are not simply fighting for revenge or to free the North, he said. As if we are building something. Aren't we? She asked. He sat back, considering. All his life, his horizons had been Winterfell's walls, the Wolfswood, the King's Road stretching south like a question. War had widened his world, but it had also narrowed his days into marches and battles, councils and casualty counts. Margaery's words tugged at a different path, a longer road. What do you think we build? He asked. A kingdom where men know who feeds them, she said. Where the harvest from the Reach can fill northern granaries and northern iron can arm southern levies. Where you are not dragged south to die for a king who has never seen snow. She met his eyes. You say you are king in the north and of the Trident. Be king in truth. Not just a banner head who leads charges, but a man whose choices reach into every field and hearth. I am trying, he said, frustration flickering. Every raven, every day, asks more of me. Grain shortages, bandits, lords jockeying for favor. Sometimes I feel less a king than a supplicant before a dozen smaller thrones. That means you are paying attention, she said. Bad kings ignore such things until the people starve. I have seen that in King's Landing. You have not. He was silent a moment, then asked, And you? What will you be? If I do as you say and spend my life thinking of grain and winter and men's bellies. Queen, she said simply. Not in name only. I will be the one who answers the ravens about orphans and widows while you ride to war. I will speak to the merchants and the septs and, yes, even the brothels because they hear more than most. I will make sure that when our banners fly, people are glad, not afraid. He watched her as the candle guttered and flared. In another life, he might have married for love, for a girl whose laughter chased him through Winterfell's halls. In this one, he had married this woman with her careful eyes and relentless mind, and some part of him suspected that, if he lived long enough to look back, he might find he was the luckier for it. "Then we do it together," he said. "We hit the Westerlands as we planned, but we do not leave our own lands in chaos behind us. While I ride west, I want ravens sent to White Harbor, to Barrowton, to every great house of the north. Tell them that Reach grain is coming, but that they must open their stores as well. No hoarding while men under my banner go hungry." Margaery nodded slowly. "And in return?" she asked. "In return," he said, "we recognize their sacrifices. Titles, lands reclaimed from traders, seats at our councils. A man who gives grain in winter should be honored more than a man who charges once in summer and sings of it for years." A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "You are learning to think like my grandmother," she said. "That is a terrifying thought," he replied, and was rewarded with a laugh that loosened something tight in his chest. The river whispered on. Outside, guards traded watches, and somewhere a singer plucked at a harp, trying out a new verse about a wolf and a rose. Inside the small solar, king and queen bent their heads together over the map, charting not just the next battle, but a future that was still more hope than plan. When they left Riverrun at last, the earth trembled. The host that spilled from the castle and flowed along the muddy roads westward was like nothing the Riverlands had seen in a generation. Northern spearmen in boiled leather and rough-woven cloaks marched beside Reach pikemen whose armor caught what little light the sun offered. Riverlords' banners fluttered between them, bright as river stones in the gray. Carts creaked under the weight of barrels and sacks, stacks of arrows and bundled spears. Smiths' wagons trundled with their mobile forges, smoke puffing from their chimneys. Herdsmen drove flocks of sheep and strings of pack mules along the verges, cursing when animals strayed too near the column. Robb rode at the fore, gray wind pacing close by his horse's flank, ears pricked, nostrils flaring at every scent. At his left, Margaery's palfrey stepped carefully through the ruts. She had traded silks for a riding habit of gray and green, a short fur cloak over her shoulders, hood down despite the cold. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind. "Does it always feel like this?" she asked, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the rumble of the host. "Like the world is moving with you? Sometimes it feels more like we're being dragged," Robb said dry. "But yes, when the whole army is on the road, it is loud." Great John rode on his other side, his laughter booming as he watched a group of Reach outriders trying to coax their horses across a shallow, stony ford without getting their feet wet. "Look at them," he guffawed, "afraid of a little mud. We should march them through the neck next. See how they like bogs up to their arses." "Careful, Great John," Margaery Tyrell said from Margaery's right. His white cloak had been exchanged for a green one, but he still sat his horse with the easy grace of a man born in a saddle. "Our horses are worth more than some men's keeps. We prefer to keep their legs sound." "Legs sound, balls clean, and hair combed," Great John retorted. "Do they piss rose petals as well?" Margaery hid a smile behind one gloved hand. "If you two must compare manhoods," she said, "perhaps you could do it somewhere other than beside my horse." Great John roared, delighted. Loras looked faintly abashed, though a ghost of humor curled his mouth. Robb felt tension he had not known he was holding ease a little. "Let them jest." Better laughter than the sullen silence of men marching toward doom. The small folk watched them pass from what remained of their fields. In some hamlets, the houses were burnt, blackened ribs of timber poking from mounds of ash. In others, huts sagged under the weight of thatch patched and repatched. Children stood barefoot in the muck, eyes wide as they took in the endless line of men and horses. Older folk, women with shawls drawn tight, men with missing fingers, held up whatever they had to offer. Baskets of onions, a few eggs, a jug of watered beer. Margaery insisted on slowing where the road allowed, tossing coins to a boy who held a lame dog in his arms, speaking a brief word to an old woman whose husband had fallen at the Green Fork. The gestures cost them little silver and less time, but Robb saw what they left behind, mouths softening into something like hope. "They will remember," she said quietly as they rode on. "When the tales are told, they will remember that the king in the north did not ride by like another storm to ruin them. They will remember the queen who stopped his horse," Robb replied. "They do not care what we are called," Margaery said, "only whether we leave the land better or worse than we found it." At midday, the column halted near a half-ruined Sept, its stones reused to shore up a farmer's cow byre. Men broke ranks to eat and to piss, to stretch aching backs and roll sore shoulders. Loras sparred with a Northman in the trampled grass, trading blows that drew a crowd of cheering onlookers. Great John insisted on judging whose sword arm was stronger, and when he could not decide, he decreed them both insufficiently drunk and demanded they drink with him until one fell off his stool. As the sun slid toward the west, the road began to rise, the land roughening. It was still Riverland soil under their horses' hooves, but beyond the next line of low hills lay the Westerlands proper, where the lion had always thought itself safe behind stone and gold. Robb reined in at a ridge and looked ahead. The air tasted different here, drier, carrying the faint metallic tang of far-off mines. The wind plucked at his hair, and gray wind lifted his nose, sniffing. "There," he said, pointing. In the distance, barely visible, a squat tower rose from a hilltop, a Lannister banner hanging limp in the still air. Their first watchtower. Margaery shaded her eyes with a hand, squinting. "Small," she observed, "for a lion's den." "Small can still bite," Robb said, "but we will pull its teeth before we go for the throat." Far to the south, the air tasted of smoke and salt instead of iron and mud. King's Landing sprawled beneath the red keep like a half-crushed spider, legs of streets radiating from the hill, its body swollen with too many people and too little food. From the balcony, the city looked almost peaceful in the late afternoon light, its roofs touched with gold. The illusion lasted until the wind shifted and carried up the cries from Flea Bottom, the clatter of carts, the distant argument of dockworkers over fish that stank of rot. Cersei Lannister stood at the parapet, a goblet of wine in hand. Her hair was bound in an intricate braid, her gown a deep crimson that set off the green of her eyes. She looked every inch the queen, every inch the lioness. Only the tightness at the corner of her mouth betrayed strain. "Look at them," Joffrey said beside her, lip curled as he watched a thin line of small folk snake toward the mud gate where crown bread was being distributed. "Vultures, all of them. They would feast on our corpses if they could." "They may yet," Tyrion Lannister said as he stepped out onto the balcony. "If the bakers do not find more flour. Our stores are perilously low." Cersei turned, displeasure flickering. "Must you always bring ill news?" she asked. "Have you nothing more cheerful to tell your king than that his subjects are hungry?" "I find that hungry subjects rarely cheer for long," Tyrion said. He held up a scroll. "Besides, this news is not entirely ill. It is interesting." Joffrey snatched at the parchment. "Read it," he demanded, shoving it back. "My eyes are for sword points, not squiggles." "Of course," Tyrion murmured, unrolling it. "A raven from the Riverlands. It seems our young wolf has taken a wife." Cersei stilled. "What?" she asked. The word was sharp as broken glass. "Robb Stark has married Margaery Tyrell," Tyrion said, watching her carefully. "At Riverrun, before gods and men, as the phrase goes." For a moment, the only sound was the wash of the wind. Then Cersei laughed, a brittle sound. "So the little rose has gone north," she said. "I should send them a wedding gift, perhaps a snowstorm." "That would be generous," Tyrion said. "From all accounts, winter is already on its way." Joffrey slammed a fist against the parapet. "Traitorous whore," he snarled. "After all I did for her, I was going to marry her once Renly was dead. Grandfather said so. She could have been my queen. And now she is another woman's," Cersei said. recovering her composure behind a mask of disdain. "Do not waste your temper on her, Joff. She is nothing." "She is not nothing," Tyrion said softly. "She is the Reach. Her marriage takes their grain and gold out of our grasp and puts it in Stark's." "That is far from nothing." Cersei's eyes cut to him, sharp. "Our father will see to the Tyrells," she said. "He will bring them to heel." "Perhaps," Tyrion said. "Or perhaps they will decide they prefer a king who does not scream at them in council and threaten to have them whipped." Joffrey spun on him, face mottled. "I am your king," he spat. "You will remember your place, uncle." "My place is wherever keeps you from losing your head," Tyrion replied. "Which, if you continue to insult every ally we have, will be sooner rather than later." Cersei bristled. "Enough," she said. "We will not bicker like fishwives. The Tyrell girl has made her choice. There are other houses, other alliances." "Not with their harvests," Tyrion said. "Dorne has fruit, yes, but little grain. The Vale hides behind its mountains. The Crownlands are stripped bare. The Westerlands mines do not feed mouths." He looked out over the city. Smoke curled from the chimneys of the Street of Steel, where smiths hammered at blades they hoped to sell to whichever side won. "We can hold for a time," he said. "Your wildfire stocks are not yet exhausted. The walls are strong. But if Stark and Tyrell win the Riverlands and the West, if Stannis takes the Narrow Sea, then we become a golden cage. Fat for a siege, but not forever." Joffrey laughed, high and shrill. "Let them come," he said. "I'll have their heads. I'll decorate the walls with them." Cersei's fingers tightened around her goblet, knuckles white. "You will do as your grandfather commands," she said. "And he will see us through this. He always has." Tyrion said nothing. He thought of Tywin's letter, the last he had received. A terse line about holding the city, about not wasting wildfire, about keeping Joffrey under control if possible and alive regardless. It had said nothing of Tyrell, of Stark, of the long game. He looked at the scroll again, at the neat southern script that described a Riverland wedding where a northern king and a southern lady had stood before priest and people. "A kingdom bound in roses," he murmured, half to himself. "Let us hope they remember that roses have thorns." The camp settled slowly, like a great beast folding itself down onto the earth. Fires sank to embers. Men's voices dropped from bellow to murmur. Somewhere, a piper played a low, wandering tune that might have been a lullaby or a lament. In the main command tent, the maps had been covered and the wine set aside. Robb had gone to walk the lines, to let the men see their king's face in the firelight. Margaery remained within, exhaustion tugging at her bones. The tent was large enough to stand in, the canvas lined with furs to blunt the night's chill. A small brazier glowed in one corner. Loras pushed aside the flap and ducked in, stooping slightly. In the close light, he looked older than his years, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes deepened by worry and hard riding. He had shed his armor for a plain leather jerkin, his hair damp from a hasty wash. "Do you have a moment, sister?" he asked. "For you," Margaery said. "Always." She gestured to a stool near the brazier. "Sit. You look as if the horse trampled you instead of carrying you." He made a face but obeyed, stretching his legs with a wince. "Your northerners ride as if the saddle grew from their backs," he said. "And their roads, if one can call them that." "Only wait until we are deeper into the hills," Margaery said. "Then you will miss these smooth tracks." He grimaced. For a moment they sat in companionable silence, the crackle of coals and the distant murmur of the camp their only company. "You are well?" Loras asked at last. The question was simple, but she heard the thickness beneath it, the fear. "I am married to a man who does not beat me, break my skin, or take pleasure in making others cower," she said. "That is more than some can say of the kings in King's Landing." "That is not an answer," he said. She sighed. "I am all right," she admitted. "Tired. There is so much to do. Every lord wants something. Every petition from the small folk could be a spark for rebellion if we ignore it too long. And now we march into the lion's den. You leave Kingsguard service and think you will escape lions, he said, a wry curve to his mouth. Instead, you go looking for them. She looked at him sharply. You know why I chose this path, she said. Grandmother did not force me. I know, he said. I know you looked at Joffrey and saw rot. I saw it too. I would have cut it out if they had let me, but they bound my sword and my will to that throne. When you said you would go north, I thought you were mad. Now, she prompted. Now I see the way the men look at him, Loras said. At Robb Stark, they follow him because they trust he will not waste them. Even your Reachmen, though they grumble about the cold. I have not seen that since Renly, she finished softly. He nodded. The name hung between them like a ghost. For a moment, Margaery saw Renly as he had been, smiling in green and gold, his crown of antlers shining in the tawny sun. It hurt still. She suspected it always would. Robb is not Renly, she said. He is quieter, less charming, but he listens in a way Renly did not always do. He does not assume he is right because the room laughs at his jests. And you? Loras asked. Do you? Do not ask if I love him, she said, more sharply than she meant. The question felt like a betrayal. Not of Robb, but of the boy whose blood had stained her hands in a dark tent. Love is a luxury in this game. I liked Renly. I liked what he could have been if the world had been kinder. I can like Robb as well in time. That will be enough. Loras studied her face. I want you to be safe, he said. If this goes wrong. If it goes wrong, she said. It will not matter where I am. The lions will not spare Highgarden any more than Winterfell. At least here, I am close to the choices being made. You could have stayed, he said. Married some lord of the Reach, lived a life of ease. She smiled. And leave you alone to throw yourself at lost causes? Never. Her smile faded. Besides, I could not stomach living a little life while you rode out to die for men who never think of the cost. This way, at least, I pay part of the price. He reached across and took her hand, rough palm surprisingly gentle. If he hurts you, Loras said. If he breaks your trust, I will. You will do nothing rash, she interrupted. You will remember that your oath is to this cause as much as mine. If he proves unworthy, we will find other paths. You know grandmother. She always has another path in mind. He snorted softly. That she does. They sat a while longer, the quiet between them an old, familiar thing. Outside, a wolf howled. Long, eerie, answered by others farther off, the sound rolling over the camp like distant thunder. Margaery squeezed her brother's hand once before letting go. Go sleep, she said. Tomorrow you will need your wits. The first lion tower waits. And you? He asked. I will sleep, she lied. When he had gone, she rose, moving to the tent's entrance to look out at the sea of canvas and fire. She found Robb at last near the outer pickets, his silhouette limned in firelight as he spoke with a group of sentries. Gray wind lingered at his heel, head up, nostrils flared toward the west. A kingdom bound in roses, she murmured. Let us see how well it weathers claws. Morning came cold and colorless, the sky a flat slab of cloud pressing low over the hills. Breath steamed from men and horses alike as the Stark Tyrell host formed in the hollow below the ridge, the clink of armor and the thud of boots a muted drumbeat against the damp earth. Ahead of them, on a rocky outcrop, the first Westerland watchtower rose. It was no great fortress, just a squat keep of pale stone, a curtain wall encircling a yard large enough for a score of horses, a wooden palisade beyond that. But from its roof, a golden lion banner drooped, its fabric stirring in a grudging breeze. Margaery sat her horse on the ridge, flanked by a small honor guard. She had argued to be allowed closer, to stand with the men as she had at other, lesser skirmishes, but both Robb and Catelyn had refused. There will be archers, Catelyn had said. And no battle is certain. We will not risk you for a signal tower. So she watched from above as Robb rode to the fore, Grey Wind at his stirrup, Loras and Greatjon at his sides. The men quieted as he raised his sword. "This is not a great castle," he called, voice carrying in the still air. "It is a first stone. We pull it, and the wall begins to crumble." A murmur of agreement ran through the ranks. Banners shifted as standard-bearers adjusted their grips. The direwolf, the trout, the rose, they all leaned forward, hungry. "There are men inside those walls," Robb said. "Men with families, as you have. We offer them a choice. Surrender and lay down their arms, and they will be spared, allowed to go home when the war permits. Resist, and we will show them what it means to stand for the lion when winter comes." He turned to where a small party of riders waited beside the vanguard, a white cloth tied to one spear. "Go," he told them. "Carry my terms." They rode out at a trot, the white scrap fluttering. For a long moment, nothing moved atop the tower. Then a figure appeared, small with distance, and another banner was hoisted halfway up the pole, the white of parley. "That's something," murmured one of Margaery's guards. "Or a feint," said another. Margaery said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the tower, willing whoever commanded within to have enough sense to see the odds. One lone outpost against an army that stretched across the hillside. A man might convince himself that courage demanded he fight, or pride, or fear of what Tywin would do if he surrendered. After an age, the white scrap dropped again. The scout party wheeled and rode back. "They refuse your grace," the lead rider said when he reached Robb. "They laughed at your terms, called you a green boy playing at war, said the lion's gold has bought them bravery." Robb's jaw tightened. "Very well," he said. "Let them see what their gold buys." Siege engines, little more than reinforced rams and hastily lashed catapults, rolled forward, pushed by grunting men. Archers moved up, arrows knocked. From the tower, a few shafts flew, falling short, quivering in the damp soil. "Loose," came the command, and the sky darkened for a heartbeat as a volley rose and fell, hissing. The first barrage rattled against stone, clattered off shields, found gaps in crenellations. A distant scream floated back, thin and high. The battle was small, in truth, barely a skirmish by the measure of this war. No songs would be sung of it. A breach in the outer palisade, a rush of men through smoking timber, steel on steel in a cramped yard. Margaery watched it all as a moving pattern rather than individual struggles, the swarm of movement around a heart of stone. She found Robb by the way Grey Wind moved. A flash of silver gray leaping over a fallen man, a shape that men on both sides tried to avoid. At one point, she saw him at the foot of the tower itself, shield raised as men above tipped boiling water or oil. But the ram crashed against the gate, again and again, until the hinges gave and the way opened. It did not take long. Outnumbered and outmatched, the garrison broke under the assault. Some died with swords in their hands. Others fell to their knees, throwing down weapons, shouting for quarter. When the smoke thinned and the shouting dwindled, Robb stood in the tower yard, helm pushed back, dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Blood spattered his mail, mostly not his own. He looked up, scanning the ridge until he found her. He raised his sword in silent salute. She touched her heel to her horse, moving down the slope with her guards until she could see his face clearly. It was set, but not hardened into something unrecognizable. There was still a man beneath the king. "How many?" she asked when she drew close, voice low enough that only he and the few nearest could hear. "Fewer than I feared," he said. "More than I like." He wiped a streak of blood from his cheek with the back of his hand. "We will bury our dead and theirs. The survivors who laid down arms will be bound by oath and sent back into the hills. Let Tywin feed men who no longer wish to die for him." "And this?" She gestured to the tower, its gate hanging crooked, lion banner torn and blackened. "What will you do with it?" "We hold it long enough to strip it," he said. "Supplies, weapons, anything of use. Then we burn it. Let the smoke carry a message ahead of us. The lions are not safe in their own den." He looked past her, to where the road wound farther west, disappearing into folds of hills. "This is only the beginning," he said. "There are larger keeps ahead, bigger teeth." "Teeth can be pulled," Margaery said. She glanced back toward the ridge, where their banners snapped in the rising wind. "Wolf and rose together, one by one if we are patient." Gray wind padded up between them, muzzle reddened. He sniffed at Margaery's boot, then huffed, as if memorizing her scent. She reached down, fingers brushing the coarse fur between his ears. For a heartbeat, the great beast closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "Rabwa," Ched, surprised. "He doesn't take to many," he said. "Then he is wiser than most men," she replied. Smoke began to rise from the tower as men set fire to dried stores and kindling piled hastily in corners. The lion banner curled black at the edges and then caught, flames devouring gold. The wind took the smoke and carried it west, toward Casterly Rock. On the ridge, a man raised a newly stitched standard, a dire wolf entwined with a rose, gray and green on white. It snapped in the strengthening breeze, visible for leagues. "A kingdom bound in roses," Margaery murmured again, watching the banner whip. "And thorns. And teeth," Robb said. "Do not forget the teeth." They stood together as the first Lannister tower burned, the sign of a war that was no longer just a northern rebellion but the slow, deliberate unmaking of a lion's realm. Stone by stone, fire by fire, until there would be nothing left for Tywin Lannister to rule over but ash and memory.